The scream came first, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet of the forest. Before Elira Voss even opened her eyes, she sat up in bed, heart pounding, and realized the sound was not human. It was the high, broken cry of a wolf pup, and it was coming from right outside her door. She grabbed her shawl and rushed outside barefoot, the cold ground biting at her feet. 3 large wolves stood in her yard, their fur silver under the moonlight, their eyes glowing with a strange, disciplined calm that no ordinary wolf could have. Between their paws lay a small bundle wrapped in cloth, shivering and whimpering. Elira knew these wolves. Everyone in Ashwood Hollow knew them. They belonged to the Alpha King, Draven Ashwood, ruler of the largest wolf territory in the region. His warriors did not wander into human villages without reason. Yet here they were, standing in her yard as if they had been sent on a mission too important to delay. She approached slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of peace, though she was not truly afraid. She had done this before. For 3 years now, ever since her grandmother passed and left her this cottage at the edge of the woods, orphaned pups had found their way to her. Some came alone, dragging themselves through the underbrush. Others were left by wolves who could not care for them. Elira never asked why. She simply took them in, fed them, and raised them until they were strong enough to return to the wild or find a new pack. But never before had the king's own wolves delivered one to her. She knelt beside the bundle and carefully peeled back the cloth. Inside was a pup, no more than a few weeks old, its fur a soft gray with a strange golden tint near its ears. Its eyes were shut tight, and its small body trembled with cold and hunger. Elira felt her chest tighten with a familiar ache. She had seen many pups like this, abandoned, frightened, alone. "You brought me a good one this time," she whispered, more to herself than to the wolves. The 3 wolves did not leave right away. They stood watching her, almost as if making sure she understood the weight of what she now held. Elira looked up at them, confused by their lingering presence. Normally, the wolves who delivered pups vanished into the trees the moment their duty was done. These 3 stayed until she lifted the pup fully into her arms and turned toward her cottage door. Only then did they retreat into the shadows, disappearing without a sound. Elira stepped inside and closed the door behind her, cradling the pup against her chest. The fire in her hearth had burned low, but the cottage was still warm enough. She laid the pup on a soft blanket near the fire and began preparing a mixture of warm goat's milk, the way she always did for the youngest arrivals. As she worked, she glanced around her home. It was modest, filled with wooden crates that served as small beds, each one holding a sleeping pup. 7 of them now, not counting the new arrival. Some were only days old. Others were older, already strong enough to play and tumble over each other in the mornings. Elira had built her entire life around caring for these forgotten creatures, and though the work was exhausting, she would not trade it for anything. She fed the new pup carefully, coaxing it to drink from a small cloth soaked in warm milk. Slowly, its cries quieted, and its small body began to relax. When it finally opened its eyes, Elira gasped softly. They were not the usual amber or brown she was used to seeing in wolf pups. They were a deep, striking blue, almost unnatural in their clarity. "Well," she murmured, smiling despite herself, "aren't you a curious little thing?" She placed the pup gently among the others, watching as it curled up close to the warmth of the fire. For a moment, everything was peaceful. The cottage was quiet, except for the soft breathing of 8 sleeping pups and the crackle of dying flames. But sleep did not come easily to Elira that night. She kept thinking about the 3 wolves and the way they had lingered, as though guarding something precious. She had cared for orphaned pups long enough to know the difference between a routine delivery and something else. This had not felt routine. By morning, the sun rose over Ashwood Hollow, casting golden light through the cottage windows. Elira woke to the sound of pups play-fighting near the hearth, their tiny growls more like squeaks than threats. She smiled, pushing aside her uneasy thoughts from the night before, and rose to start her day. She fed the pups, cleaned their bedding, and carried buckets of water from the nearby stream. The new pup, the one with the golden-tinted fur and blue eyes, stayed close to her the entire morning, following her every movement with unusual focus. Most pups its age barely opened their eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. This one watched her as if it understood exactly what she was doing. Elira found herself talking to it more than she talked to the others, as if some invisible thread connected them. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" she said, only half joking, as the pup pawed weakly at her sleeve. Later that day, an elderly neighbor named Rosalind Hart came to visit, bringing a basket of bread and cheese. Rosalind was one of the few people in the village who understood Elira's connection to the wolves and never judged her for it. She sat by the fire, watching the pups tumble over one another, and noticed the new one almost immediately. "That one's different," Rosalind said, tilting her head. "Look at the markings near its ears. I've never seen a pup with gold like that." "I noticed too," Elira admitted. "The wolves who brought it acted strange as well. They stayed longer than usual." Rosalind's expression grew thoughtful. "The king's wolves rarely linger for ordinary pups. Perhaps this one carries importance you don't yet understand." Elira brushed off the comment at the time, though the words stayed with her throughout the day. She had heard rumors about the Alpha King, about the tragedy that struck his household years ago, about the mate he lost, and the shadow that fell over his court ever since. But rumors were just rumors, and pups were just pups, regardless of how curious their markings might be. As evening approached, Elira sat outside her cottage, watching the sun dip below the tree line. The forest around her stretched wide and untamed, home to countless creatures, wolves included. She often wondered about the pack that ruled these lands, the one led by a king she had never personally met, despite living so close to his territory for years. She thought of him sometimes, imagining what kind of leader commanded wolves disciplined enough to travel long distances just to deliver an orphan safely. Whatever kind of man he was, he clearly cared for the vulnerable ones in his territory, even if his own reputation suggested otherwise. As night fell again, Elira brought the pups inside and settled them near the fire. The new pup nestled itself closest to her, its small body pressed against her side as it slept. She stroked its fur gently, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the creature, a sense that its arrival marked the beginning of something far bigger than she could yet imagine. Outside, unseen in the darkness beyond her cottage, a lone wolf watched from the tree line. Its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, fixed intently on the small cottage and the woman who now held a secret she did not yet know she carried. The wolf did not approach. It simply watched, silent and patient, before disappearing back into the depths of the forest, leaving Elira and her pups undisturbed for the night. Morning came again, quiet and ordinary, yet Elira could not shake the feeling that her life was about to change. She busied herself with her usual routine, but her eyes kept drifting toward the pup with the golden markings, now sleeping peacefully near the hearth. Something about its presence felt heavier than the others, as though the forest itself held its breath around this one small creature. She had no way of knowing that within days, her quiet, simple life caring for forgotten pups would draw the attention of the most powerful wolf in the entire territory. She had no way of knowing that the pup sleeping beside her was not simply another orphan to be raised and released back into the wild. For now, she only knew that something about this pup felt different, and that the wolves who delivered it had looked at her not with the usual detachment of duty, but with something closer to reverence. Whatever secret this small creature carried, Elira sensed that she would soon be pulled into a world far greater than the quiet cottage she called home. The days that followed felt strangely calm, almost too calm. Elira continued her daily routine, feeding and caring for the pups as she always had. Yet she found herself glancing toward the tree line more often than usual, half expecting to see wolves watching her from the shadows. None appeared. Still, the feeling of being observed never fully left her. The pup with the golden markings grew stronger with each passing day, faster than any of the others she had cared for. By the end of the week, its eyes had sharpened, its movements had steadied, and it had begun exploring the cottage with a curiosity that seemed almost deliberate, as if searching for something specific. Elira decided to name it, something she rarely did with pups meant to return to the wild, but this one felt different enough to deserve it. She settled on the name Kale, a name she had heard once in an old story about a wolf spirit said to guard lost travelers. It felt fitting, somehow, for a pup who had arrived under such unusual circumstances. As she watched Kale play near the fire one evening, tumbling clumsily over his siblings, she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Whatever mystery surrounded his arrival, she decided she would simply continue doing what she always did, caring for him with the same devotion she gave every pup who found their way to her door. She had no idea that far across the territory, within the walls of a grand stone hall, The Alpha King himself sat in silence, staring into a dying fire, thinking of the very same pup she now cradled in her arms. Draven Ashwood sat alone in the great hall of his stone fortress, the fire before him casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, his warriors patrolled the borders of his territory, watching for threats that had grown more frequent in recent months. Inside, the king himself looked less like a ruler and more like a man carrying a weight too heavy for any single set of shoulders. He had not always been this way. Years ago, before the tragedy that reshaped his life, Draven had been known throughout the territory as a fierce but fair leader, respected by his pack and feared by his enemies. He had a mate then, a woman named Celine, whose warmth had softened even his hardest edges. Together they had built a peaceful era for Ashwood territory, one where pups no longer feared for their safety, and rival packs thought twice before testing his borders. That peace shattered the night Celine was lost. Draven rarely allowed himself to think about that night, but tonight, staring into the flames, the memories crept back uninvited. He remembered the chaos, the betrayal within his own court, and the desperate choice he made to protect the one thing that mattered most in the aftermath. He had done what he believed necessary, even if it meant hiding away part of his own life from everyone, including his most trusted advisors. A knock at the heavy wooden door pulled him from his thoughts. His second-in-command, a broad-shouldered wolf named Garrick Hale, entered and bowed slightly before speaking. "The delivery was made, my king," Garrick said. The healer accepted him without hesitation, just as she has with all the others. Draven's jaw tightened, though his expression remained carefully controlled. "And she suspects nothing?" "Nothing beyond curiosity," Garrick replied. "She noticed the markings, as we expected she would, but she has no reason to think beyond that." Draven nodded slowly, though the tension in his shoulders did not ease. Sending his own son away, even temporarily, had not been an easy decision. Yet with enemies circling closer, whispers of betrayal still lingering within his own ranks, he could not risk keeping the pup within the fortress walls. Not until he uncovered exactly who had been responsible for what happened to Celine, and ensured his son would be safe from any similar fate. "He remains there until I say otherwise," Draven said firmly. "No one outside the three of us knows the truth. Not the court, not the healers within these walls. No one." Garrick hesitated before speaking again. "My king, if I may ask, why the healer? There are trusted caretakers within our own pack who could have raised him just as easily." Draven's gaze remained fixed on the fire, his expression unreadable. "Because she is outside our world entirely. No connections to the court. No ties to anyone who might wish harm upon my bloodline. She simply cares for forgotten pups because her heart demands it, nothing more. That makes her the safest place for him." It was not the whole truth, and Draven knew it. There was something else, something he had not admitted even to himself, that made Alira Voss the right choice beyond mere logic. He had watched her from a distance more than once over the past year, observing the quiet dedication she poured into caring for pups the rest of the world had abandoned. There was something steady about her, something untouched by the ambition that plagued his own court. Garrick bowed again and left the hall, leaving Draven alone with his thoughts once more. He rose from his chair and walked toward the window, overlooking the vast forest beyond his fortress. Somewhere out there, his son slept peacefully in a stranger's cottage, unaware of the danger that had forced his father to hide him away. Draven closed his eyes, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability. He thought of Celine, of the life they had once imagined together, raising their son within these very walls, teaching him the ways of leadership and honor. That future had been stolen from them both, and now Draven carried the burden alone, forced to protect his son through secrecy rather than strength. He thought too of Alira, though he tried to push the thought away as quickly as it came. He told himself his growing curiosity about her was simply a natural concern for the woman now responsible for his son's safety. Yet some part of him knew it was more than that, even if he refused to name it. The following days passed with Draven receiving quiet reports from his warriors, each confirming that his son remained safe and well cared for within Alira's cottage. He found himself asking for more details than necessary, questions about how the pup was eating, whether he played well with the other pups, whether Alira showed any signs of suspicion. Garrick, ever perceptive, noticed his king's growing interest extended beyond simple concern for his son's welfare, though he wisely kept his observations to himself. One evening, Unable to settle his restless thoughts, Draven made a decision that surprised even himself. He would visit the cottage personally, disguised among his warriors during the next delivery, to see his son with his own eyes, rather than relying solely on reports. He told himself it was purely a father's need to check on his child. He ignored the small, persistent voice, reminding him that no other pup's caretaker had ever earned this same level of personal attention from him. As the next orphaned pup was discovered within his territory, found abandoned near the eastern border after a rival pack's dispute left it parentless, Draven informed Garrick of his intention to accompany the delivery team himself. "My king, is that wise?" Garrick asked carefully. "If anyone recognizes you, no one will recognize a lone wolf among many," Draven replied firmly. "I simply wish to see for myself that all remains well." Garrick did not argue further, though his expression suggested he understood there was more driving his king's decision than mere caution. That night, under the cover of darkness, Draven joined his warriors as they made their way toward Alira's cottage, carrying the newest orphaned pup between them. As they approached the familiar clearing, Draven felt an unexpected tightening in his chest, a mixture of anticipation and something he could not quite name. Through the trees, he caught his first glimpse of the cottage's warm firelight glowing through the windows, and beyond that, briefly visible through the glass, the woman who now held his son's safety in her hands. Alira Voss moved gracefully within her home, tending to the pups scattered across her floor, her expression soft with the same quiet devotion Draven had heard described in every report. For a moment, he simply watched, unseen among the shadows of the trees, feeling something shift within him that he had not felt in years. Then, gathering himself, he stepped forward with his warriors to make the delivery, ready to see his son again, even if only from a careful distance, and to finally meet, however briefly, the woman who had become an unexpected part of his carefully guarded secret. Alira noticed the change in the wolves the moment they stepped into the clearing that night. There were more of them than usual, and among the group stood one wolf who carried himself differently, taller and more composed, with a presence that seemed to command silence from the others without a single sound. She did not know his name yet, but something about the way the other wolves positioned themselves around him told her he was not an ordinary guard. She opened her door as she always did, ready to receive whatever pup they had brought this time. The wolves stepped forward, revealing a small trembling bundle, and Alira reached out gently to take it into her arms. As she did, her eyes met the gaze of the tall, commanding wolf, standing slightly apart from the rest. His eyes were a deep amber, sharp and searching, as though he were trying to read something in her expression. Alira held his gaze for a long moment, feeling an unfamiliar flutter in her chest that she quickly dismissed as simple curiosity. She had never seen this particular wolf before, yet something about him felt significant, almost familiar, though she could not explain why. "Thank you," she said softly, addressing the group as she always did, though her words felt directed more toward him than the others. The wolf tilted his head slightly, an oddly human gesture, before the group retreated into the trees, leaving her alone once again, with a new pup in her arms. She carried the pup inside and settled it near the fire with the others, glancing toward Kale, who was now nearly 2 weeks old and growing steadily stronger. He lifted his head at the new arrival, sniffing curiously, before settling back down beside his siblings. Alira smiled at the sight, grateful for the small moments of normalcy amid the strange feeling that had followed her since the tall wolf's visit. She did not know that the wolf she had just exchanged glances with was the very ruler of the territory she called home. She did not know that he had stood there, watching his own son from a careful distance, torn between the instinct to reveal himself and the discipline that kept him hidden among his warriors. Draven retreated with his pack that night, his thoughts consumed by the brief exchange with Alira. He had expected to feel nothing beyond confirmation that his son remained safe. Instead, he found himself replaying the moment of her gaze meeting his, the quiet strength in her expression, the gentle way she had spoken to his warriors, despite having no reason to trust them beyond routine. He returned to his fortress that night, more unsettled than before, though he told himself firmly that his growing curiosity about the healer was simply a byproduct of his responsibility toward his son. Yet as the days passed, he found himself requesting updates more frequently, and eventually, he made the decision to visit the cottage again, this time without the excuse of a delivery. Garrick raised an eyebrow when Draven informed him of his intention. My king, there is no pup to deliver this time. What reason will we give for approaching her cottage? I require no reason beyond ensuring my son's safety, Draven replied, though even he recognized the thinness of his own justification. 2 nights later, Draven approached Alira's cottage alone, leaving his warriors behind at the edge of the forest. He told himself this was simply a precaution, a king ensuring firsthand that his heir remained protected. Yet as he drew closer to the small, warmly lit home, his heartbeat quickened in a way that had nothing to do with duty. He knocked on her door, and when it opened, Alira stood before him, her expression shifting from surprise to careful curiosity. She recognized him immediately as the tall wolf from before, only now he stood before her in his human form, tall and imposing, his amber eyes just as sharp as she remembered. I apologize for the late hour, Draven said, his voice steady despite the unfamiliar nervousness stirring within him. I wish to see for myself how the pups are faring. Alira studied him for a long moment before stepping aside to let him in. You're the one who's been sending them, she said, more statement than question. The Alpha King himself. Draven inclined his head slightly, neither confirming nor denying, though his silence was answer enough. Alira felt a strange mixture of nervousness and intrigue as she led him toward the fire, where the pups lay scattered across the floor, tumbling over one another in their nightly play. Draven's eyes immediately found Kale among the group, watching as his son rolled playfully alongside 2 other pups, seemingly unaware of the danger that had forced his father to hide him here. For a brief moment, the carefully controlled mask Draven wore slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath the surface. Alira noticed the shift in his expression and felt an unexpected pull of sympathy toward him. You care for him, she said softly, not entirely sure why she felt compelled to voice the observation. Draven's gaze snapped toward her, guarded once more. I care for all the pups within my territory, he replied carefully, though his tone lacked conviction. Alira did not press further, sensing that whatever truth lay beneath his words was not hers to uncover yet. Instead, she gestured toward a chair near the fire. Would you like to stay a while? The pups seemed to enjoy having visitors, even quiet ones. Draven hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to such casual hospitality, before accepting her offer and settling into the chair. He watched the pups play for a long while in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing toward Alira as she moved about the cottage, tending to small tasks with the same quiet devotion he had observed from a distance many times before. You do this alone? He finally asked, breaking the silence. Caring for so many, with no help? I manage, Alira replied simply. Someone has to, and I've never been able to turn away a creature in need. Draven studied her carefully, noting the quiet strength beneath her simple words. He had expected to find a woman motivated by duty, or perhaps compensation for her services, yet everything about her suggested a purity of intention that felt foreign within the political complexities of his own court. You remind me of someone, he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Alira glanced at him curiously, sensing the weight behind his statement. Someone you've lost? Draven's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Alira feared she had overstepped, but instead of retreating, he simply nodded once, his expression distant. Yes, he admitted quietly, someone very important. The conversation lingered there, neither pushing further, yet both sensing an unspoken understanding passing between them. Draven stayed longer than he intended that night, watching his son play, speaking quietly with Alira about the pups, about the forest, about small, insignificant things that somehow felt significant in the moment. When he finally rose to leave, he paused at the door, turning back toward her one last time. Thank you, he said simply, for everything you do for them. Alira nodded, watching as he disappeared into the darkness beyond her cottage, leaving her with a strange warmth in her chest that lingered long after he was gone. She glanced toward Kale, sleeping peacefully near the fire, and wondered, not for the first time, what secrets truly lay behind the golden markings near his ears, and the king who seemed so quietly devoted to his safety. Word of the king's visit to the healer's cottage did not stay hidden for long. Garrick had kept his silence, but wolves possessed keen senses, and one of the younger warriors who had waited at the edge of the forest that night mentioned the king's unusual detour to a friend within the pack, believing it harmless gossip. Within days, whispers began circulating through Draven's court, quiet murmurs about the king's mysterious visits to a human healer at the edge of his territory. Draven's closest advisor, a sharp-eyed wolf named Corwin Blackwell, approached him one afternoon with carefully measured words. "My king, there are rumors spreading about your visits to the healer's cottage. Some wonder why the Alpha King himself would take such personal interest in the placement of orphaned pups." Draven's expression remained unreadable, though internally he felt the familiar tightening of caution. "The safety of every pup within my territory is my concern, Corwin. I see no reason to explain myself further." Corwin studied him carefully, his expression suggesting he was not entirely convinced, though he wisely chose not to press the matter directly. "Of course, my king. I only mention it because not everyone within the court shares such generous interpretations." The warning was subtle, but Draven understood its weight immediately. Not everyone within his court could be trusted, a truth he had learned painfully in the aftermath of Celine's death. If suspicion grew too loud, if the wrong ears heard rumors and connected them to deeper truths, the fragile safety he had built around his son could crumble entirely. Yet despite the growing risk, Draven found himself unable to stay away from Alira's cottage entirely. He told himself each visit would be the last, a final check to ensure his son's safety. Yet each time he found new reasons to return, new excuses that grew thinner with every visit. Alira, for her part, found herself anticipating his arrivals more than she cared to admit. She told herself it was simply the natural curiosity of caring for the ruler's hidden concerns, yet the warmth that spread through her chest each time she saw him approaching through the trees suggested something far less simple. One evening, as autumn winds began sweeping through Ashwood Hollow, Draven arrived at her cottage, carrying a small satchel of medicinal herbs, a gift meant to help with the pup's care during the coming cold season. Alira accepted the gift with quiet surprise, unaccustomed to such thoughtful gestures from anyone, let alone a king. "You didn't need to do this," she said softly, examining the carefully selected herbs within the satchel. "I wanted to," Draven replied simply, watching her expression with quiet intensity. "Winter can be harsh for pups this young. I would not want any of them to suffer needlessly." Alira smiled softly, grateful for his consideration, though she suspected his concern extended beyond mere practicality. As the weeks passed, their conversations grew longer, their comfort around one another deepening, in ways neither had anticipated. Draven found himself sharing pieces of his past he had never spoken of to anyone within his own court, quiet fragments of grief and responsibility that Alira absorbed with patient understanding rather than judgment. In turn, Alira shared stories of her own past, of the grandmother who had raised her within these very walls, of the quiet loneliness that had settled over her life since her grandmother's passing, filled only by the constant arrival of pups needing her care. "You've built something beautiful here," Draven said one evening, watching as Kale and his siblings tumbled playfully across the cottage floor. "Something the rest of the world seems to have forgotten how to create." Alira glanced toward him, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. "It's simple, really. I just try to give them what they need. Warmth, safety, patience. It's not so different from what any parent would do." Draven's expression shifted subtly at her words, his gaze drifting toward Kale, with an intensity Alira had grown familiar with over their many visits. She had begun to suspect, though she had not yet voiced it aloud, that his attachment to this particular pup ran deeper than simple concern for territorial safety. "You watch him differently than the others," she said carefully one evening, unable to hold back her curiosity any longer. "Why?" Draven's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing, clearly weighing how much truth he was willing to share. Alira did not push further, sensing the delicate nature of whatever secret he carried, though her curiosity lingered heavily in the silence between them. "There are things I cannot yet explain," Draven finally said, his voice low and careful. "But please understand, Alira, that pup's safety matters to me more than you could possibly know." Alira studied him carefully, sensing the sincerity behind his guarded words. "I already care for him as though he were my own," she said softly. "Whatever reasons you have for his safety, know that I will protect him with everything I have, regardless of what secrets surround him." Draven's expression softened at her words, something close to gratitude flickering across his usually guarded features. "I believe you," he said quietly. "That is precisely why I chose you." The words hung heavily between them, filled with unspoken meaning, neither was quite ready to fully unpack. Yet in that moment, standing together in the warm firelight of her modest cottage, surrounded by sleeping pups and unspoken secrets, something between them shifted permanently, deepening into a bond neither could easily deny nor fully explain. Outside, unseen in the shadows beyond the tree line, a pair of watchful eyes observed the cottage with growing suspicion. The rumors circulating through Draven's court had reached ears far beyond his own advisors, ears belonging to those who remembered the tragedy of Celine's death all too well, and who now wondered exactly why their king had grown so unusually attached to a simple healer's cottage at the edge of his territory. Whatever secrets Draven believed he had successfully hidden were beginning to unravel, thread by careful thread, drawing closer toward a confrontation neither he nor Illyra could yet anticipate. Within the stone walls of Draven's fortress, tensions simmered beneath the surface of everyday court life. Corwin Blackwell moved through the halls with practiced calm, though his mind churned constantly with calculations and suspicions he shared with no one, not even the king he served. He had noticed the pattern of Draven's absences, the frequency of his visits toward the edge of the territory, and had begun quietly gathering information of his own. Corwin was not alone in his suspicions. A small faction within the court, wolves who had never fully accepted Draven's leadership following Celine's death, began meeting in secret, exchanging whispers about the king's strange behavior and what it might mean for the stability of the pack. Among this faction stood a wolf named Talon Ridgway, ambitious and calculating, who had long harbored resentment toward Draven's rule. Talon believed the territory deserved stronger leadership, one unburdened by grief and secrecy, and he saw in Draven's unusual behavior an opportunity to finally expose weaknesses that could shift power within the pack. "The king visits a human healer's cottage with unusual frequency," Talon said quietly during one of the faction's secret gatherings. "Why would our alpha concern himself so deeply with the placement of orphaned pups, unless something more significant is being hidden?" The other wolves exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring among themselves. One of them, a cautious wolf named Fenwick Bram, spoke hesitantly. "Perhaps he simply seeks comfort after everything that happened to Celine. Grief affects wolves differently." Talon's expression hardened. "Grief does not explain secrecy of this magnitude. I believe something is being hidden from this court, something significant enough that our king feels it necessary to keep it beyond our fortress walls." The group fell into uneasy silence, none of them daring to voice the darkest possibility lingering unspoken among them, that perhaps the king's heir, believed lost alongside Celine, might still be alive, hidden away from the very court meant to protect him. Meanwhile, unaware of the growing suspicion within his own court, Draven continued his visits to Illyra's cottage, drawn increasingly by both his devotion to his son and his growing feelings toward the woman who had unknowingly become entangled in his carefully guarded secret. Illyra, too, began noticing subtle changes in Cale's behavior as the weeks passed. He grew stronger and more perceptive, far faster than any of the other pups she had cared for, often watching her and Draven with an attentiveness that seemed almost too aware for a creature so young. One afternoon, as Illyra prepared a simple meal within her cottage, she noticed Cale sitting unusually still near the window, his sharp blue eyes fixed intently on the tree line beyond her home. She approached him curiously, following his gaze, though she saw nothing beyond the usual stillness of the forest. "What is it, little one?" she murmured softly, kneeling beside him. Cale turned his gaze toward her briefly, before returning his attention to the trees, a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbling from his small chest. Illyra frowned, unfamiliar with such behavior from a pup his age, and made a mental note to mention it to Draven during his next visit. That evening, when Draven arrived, Illyra relayed her concerns immediately. "He's been unusually alert lately," she explained, watching as Draven's expression grew serious. Watching the trees, almost as though sensing something out there. Draven's jaw tightened, his instincts sharpening at her words. He had long suspected that keeping his son hidden would only remain effective for so long before those seeking to harm his bloodline eventually uncovered the truth. If Cale himself sensed danger approaching, it meant time was growing shorter than Draven had hoped. "I will increase patrols around the cottage," Draven said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Discreetly, so as not to draw further attention, but I will not risk his safety, or yours, Illyra." Illyra nodded, grateful for his protective instincts, though a flicker of worry settled uneasily within her chest. She had grown deeply attached to Kale and the other pups under her care, and the thought of danger approaching her quiet, peaceful life left her unsettled in ways she had not previously considered. "Draven," she said quietly, using his name directly for the first time since their meetings began. "What exactly are we protecting him from?" Draven met her gaze steadily, weighing the risks of revealing more than he had previously intended. Finally he spoke, his voice low and heavy with unspoken grief. "There are those within my own court who resent my leadership, who believe my line should end with me, rather than continue through an heir they see as a threat to their ambitions." Illyra's breath caught at his words, the weight of his admission settling heavily between them. "Kale is your son," she said softly, though it was less a question and more a confirmation of what she had begun to suspect for weeks. Draven nodded slowly, relief mixing with fear, as he finally allowed the truth to surface between them. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "My son, and heir to everything I protect. His mother died protecting him the night our enemies attempted to end our bloodline entirely. I could not risk keeping him within my fortress walls, not until I uncovered every traitor hiding among my own ranks." Illyra absorbed his words carefully, her earlier suspicions now confirmed, though the full weight of the danger surrounding Kale settled heavily upon her shoulders. "Then we protect him together," she said firmly, her resolve unwavering despite the fear tightening within her chest. "Whatever it takes, Draven, I will not let anyone harm him." Draven's expression softened at her unwavering determination, gratitude, and something deeper flickering within his amber eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, reaching out to gently grasp her hand, a small gesture that carried immense weight between them. "I do not know how to repay the safety and love you've given him." Illyra squeezed his hand gently in return, offering silent reassurance. "You don't need to repay me, Draven. Just promise me we'll keep him safe, no matter what comes." Draven nodded solemnly, sealing an unspoken promise between them, as the fire crackled softly beside them, illuminating the quiet strength of two people, now bound together by secrecy, love, and the shared devotion to protect a small, sleeping pup, whose true identity carried the weight of an entire territory's future. With the truth finally spoken aloud between them, Draven and Illyra settled into a new understanding, one built not just on shared secrecy, but on a partnership that felt steadier with each passing day. Draven increased his visits, no longer needing to invent reasons, and Illyra found herself welcoming him with genuine warmth rather than simple curiosity. Kale continued growing at a remarkable pace, his intelligence and awareness far surpassing that of any ordinary pup. He recognized Draven immediately upon each visit, his small tail wagging eagerly, his blue eyes bright with recognition that no pup his age should have possessed. Illyra watched their bond deepen with quiet joy, grateful to witness the tender moments between father and son, even if such moments had to remain hidden from the rest of the world. "He knows you," Illyra said one evening, smiling as she watched Kale scramble excitedly toward Draven the moment he stepped through her door. "Every single time." Draven knelt down, scooping his son gently into his arms, his usually guarded expression softening completely. "He's stronger than I expected already," he murmured, running a careful hand along Kale's small back. "Perhaps stronger than even I was at his age." Illyra watched the tender scene with quiet happiness, though a small ache lingered within her chest, a reminder of the danger still surrounding this small family she had unexpectedly become part of. She pushed the worry aside for now, choosing instead to focus on the warmth of the moment before her. As winter deepened across Ashwood Hollow, Draven's visits became a source of comfort for both him and Illyra, a brief escape from the political tensions simmering within his fortress, and the quiet loneliness that had defined her life for so long. They spoke often of small things, the changing seasons, the playful antics of the pups, gradually building a friendship that neither had anticipated, but both had come to cherish deeply. Yet even as their bond strengthened, the danger surrounding them continued to grow. Within the fortress, Talon Ridgway's faction grew bolder, no longer content with quiet whispers and secret meetings. They began actively searching for proof of their suspicions, questioning warriors who had accompanied deliveries to Illyra's cottage, piecing together fragments of information that slowly painted a clearer picture of the truth Draven had worked so hard to protect. Garrick, sensing the growing danger, approached Draven with quiet urgency one evening. "My king, Talon's faction grows more persistent. I fear they suspect the truth about your son, or will soon enough." Draven's expression darkened, the peaceful moments he had recently allowed himself now overshadowed by renewed urgency. Then we must move carefully. I will not risk exposing Kale before I am certain of his safety. Perhaps it is time to consider bringing him back within the fortress walls, Garrick suggested carefully, under heavier protection, rather than relying solely on secrecy. Draven considered this deeply, torn between the safety of his fortress and the peaceful life Kale had known within Alira's care. If I bring him back too soon, I risk exposing him directly to those who wish him harm. Yet if I wait too long, Talon's faction may discover him regardless. The weight of the decision settled heavily upon Draven's shoulders, torn between competing dangers with no clear path forward. He resolved to visit Alira once more, seeking her counsel despite the political complexities that made such decisions difficult to share, even with his most trusted advisors. When he arrived at her cottage that evening, Alira immediately sensed the tension in his demeanor. "What's happened?" she asked, guiding him toward the fire where Kale slept peacefully among his siblings. Draven explained the growing suspicion within his court, the careful calculations he now faced regarding his son's safety. Alira listened intently, her expression thoughtful as she processed the weight of his words. "Whatever you decide," she finally said, "know that I will support you completely. Kale's safety matters more than anything else, and I trust your judgment in protecting him." Draven's gaze softened at her unwavering support, gratitude mixing with the deep affection he had grown to hold for her over their months together. "You've given me more than protection for my son," he admitted quietly. "You've given me a peace I thought I lost forever the night Celine died." Alira reached out gently, taking his hand within her own. "You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore, Draven. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Their quiet moment was interrupted suddenly by a low growl from Kale, who had woken and now stood rigidly near the window, his small body tense, his blue eyes fixed intently on the darkness beyond the glass. Draven rose immediately, his instincts sharpening at his son's unusual alertness. "Something's out there," he said quietly, moving toward the window with practiced caution. Alira followed closely, her heart pounding with sudden fear. Through the darkness beyond the trees, faint movement flickered briefly before disappearing entirely, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. "We need to strengthen protection around this cottage immediately," Draven said firmly, his expression hardening with renewed urgency. "Whatever Talon's faction knows, or suspects, they may already be watching us." Alira nodded, her earlier fears now fully justified, though her resolve remained steady despite the growing danger. "Then we prepare," she said firmly. "Whatever comes, we protect him together, no matter the cost." Draven met her determined gaze, drawing strength from her unwavering resolve, even as the shadows beyond her cottage walls grew heavier with unseen threats, slowly closing in, around the secret they had worked so desperately to protect. Draven doubled the number of warriors patrolling the forest surrounding Alira's cottage, though he instructed them to remain hidden, careful not to draw unnecessary attention that might confirm the suspicions already circulating within his court. Garrick personally oversaw the arrangement, positioning trusted wolves at careful intervals throughout the surrounding trees, watching for any sign of intrusion. Alira, meanwhile, found herself living with a constant undercurrent of tension, though she refused to let it interfere with the care she provided for the pups within her home. She continued her daily routines, feeding, cleaning, and comforting the young wolves under her care, while remaining watchful of Kale's increasingly alert behavior. The pup had grown remarkably over the past months, no longer the small, trembling bundle first placed into her arms. He moved with surprising confidence for his age, his intelligence evident in the careful way he observed his surroundings, always alert to changes others might overlook. One afternoon, as Alira prepared a simple meal within her cottage, she noticed Kale sitting near the door, his ears perked forward attentively. Moments later, a soft knock echoed through the cottage, and Alira opened the door to find Garrick standing outside, his expression grave. "Healer," he said quietly, glancing briefly toward the forest behind him. "The king requests your presence at the fortress. There's been a development within the court that requires immediate discussion." Alira's stomach tightened with sudden apprehension. "Is Kale in danger?" "Not directly, not yet," Garrick replied carefully, "but it would be wise to hear the king's concerns directly." Alira nodded, quickly arranging for a trusted young woman from the village, someone she had occasionally relied upon for help with the pups, to watch over the cottage during her absence. She gathered her shawl and followed Garrick through the quiet forest paths toward Draven's fortress, a place she had never before visited despite months of growing closeness with its ruler. The fortress itself was imposing, its stone walls rising high above the surrounding trees, guarded by wolves whose disciplined presence reminded Alira immediately of the seriousness surrounding Draven's position. She was led through quiet corridors until she reached a private chamber, where Draven awaited her, his expression tense with barely restrained urgency. "Alira," he said, rising immediately as she entered. "Thank you for coming." "What's happened?" she asked, sensing the gravity in his tone. Draven hesitated only briefly before explaining. "Talon Ridgway, one of the wolves within my court, who has long resented my leadership, has begun gathering support among those who share his ambitions. My advisors believe he suspects the truth about Kale, and may attempt to act on those suspicions soon." Alira's chest tightened with fear, though she forced herself to remain steady. "What does that mean for Kale's safety?" "It means we must act carefully but swiftly," Draven replied. "I've decided it's time to bring Kale back within the fortress, under direct protection, rather than relying solely on secrecy that grows weaker by the day." Alira absorbed his words slowly, understanding the necessity of his decision, even as her heart ached at the thought of Kale leaving her care. "I understand," she said quietly. "His safety matters more than anything else." Draven studied her expression carefully, noting the quiet sorrow behind her composed acceptance. "Alira, I would not ask you to simply hand him over and disappear from his life. If you're willing, I would like you to remain close, perhaps even within the fortress itself, to continue caring for him during this transition." Alira's breath caught at the unexpected offer, surprise mixing with cautious hope. "You would allow that?" "I would welcome it," Draven said softly, his amber eyes holding hers with quiet sincerity. "You've become more than simply his caretaker, Alira. You've become someone I trust completely, someone Kale already loves deeply. I do not wish to separate either of you unnecessarily." Alira felt warmth spreading through her chest, despite the underlying danger surrounding their conversation. "Then I accept," she said firmly. "Wherever Kale needs to be, I will be there to help protect him." Draven's expression softened with visible relief, gratitude mixing with something deeper that neither had yet fully acknowledged aloud. "Thank you," he murmured, reaching out to gently take her hand within his own. "I do not know how I would face this danger without your strength beside me." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. Garrick entered, his expression tense. "My king, forgive the intrusion, but Talon has requested an audience, claiming urgent matters regarding the safety of the pack." Draven's jaw tightened, understanding immediately the political maneuvering behind such a request. "Send him in," he said firmly, releasing Alira's hand reluctantly as he prepared to face the growing threat directly. Talon entered moments later, his expression carefully neutral, though his sharp eyes flickered briefly toward Alira, with poorly concealed curiosity. "My king," he said smoothly, bowing slightly. "I did not realize you were entertaining guests." "Alira Voss has been assisting with matters concerning the territory's orphaned pups," Draven replied evenly, his tone giving away nothing beyond simple diplomatic courtesy. "What urgent matters bring you here, Talon?" Talon's gaze lingered a moment longer on Alira before returning to Draven, his expression carefully composed despite the calculating glint within his eyes. "Rumors have spread among the court, my king, concerning your frequent visits to a human healer's cottage at the edge of our territory. Some wonder if perhaps there is more significance to these visits than simple concern for orphaned pups." Draven met his gaze steadily, refusing to reveal even the slightest hint of vulnerability. "The safety of every creature within my territory is my responsibility, Talon. I see no reason to justify my actions further to satisfy idle court gossip." Talon's lips curved into a thin, calculating smile. "Of course, my king. I simply thought it wise to bring such concerns directly to you, rather than allow rumors to fester unchecked." "Duly noted," Draven replied coolly, his tone leaving no room for further discussion. "Is there anything else, Talon?" Talon bowed once more, his expression revealing nothing beyond practiced diplomacy. "Nothing further, my king. I merely wish to ensure the stability of our court remains unquestioned." As Talon departed, Draven's expression darkened considerably, the underlying threat within Talon's carefully chosen words, evident despite his composed delivery. "He knows more than he's revealing," Draven said quietly, turning back toward Alira. "We must move quickly, to secure Kale's safety, before Talon's suspicions solidify into open confrontation." Alira nodded, resolve steadying her earlier fear. "Then let's not waste another moment," she said firmly. "Kale needs us now more than ever." The plan to bring Kale within the fortress walls moved quickly, though Draven insisted on careful discretion to avoid alerting Talon's faction before the transition was complete. Alira gathered her belongings, and the pups still under her care, arranging for trusted villagers to help relocate the other orphans to safe temporary housing, while she and Kale moved into the fortress under Draven's protection. The night of the move arrived quietly, warriors positioned strategically throughout the forest to ensure safe passage. Alira carried Kale carefully against her chest as they moved swiftly through the trees, Draven walking protectively beside her, his senses sharp and alert to any sign of danger. They reached the fortress without incident, and Alira felt a wave of relief wash over her as the heavy gates closed behind them, sealing them within the relative safety of Draven's stronghold. Yet the relief was short-lived, as within days, whispers began circulating even within the fortress walls, rumors of a hidden child now residing under the king's direct protection. Talon, sensing the shifting circumstances, grew increasingly bold in his actions, gathering his faction more openly, no longer content to hide behind careful whispers. Garrick reported growing unrest among certain warriors loyal to Talon, hints of a potential confrontation brewing beneath the fortress's controlled surface. "They grow restless, my king," Garrick warned one evening, his expression grave. "Talon has convinced several warriors that your continued silence regarding the child proves deception. He argues the pact deserves transparency, using it to justify his growing influence." Draven's jaw tightened, understanding the delicate balance now required to protect both his son and the stability of his territory. Then perhaps it is time to address the truth directly, before Talon forces the issue into open conflict. Alira, present during the discussion, glanced toward him with quiet concern. "Are you certain that's wise? Revealing Kale's identity could expose him to even greater danger." "Continued secrecy grows more dangerous by the day," Draven replied heavily. "If Talon exposes the truth on his own terms, he controls the narrative entirely. Better I reveal it myself, on my terms, before he seizes that advantage." The decision weighed heavily upon them both, yet the necessity became increasingly clear, as tensions within the fortress continued escalating. Draven called for a formal gathering of the court, intending to finally reveal the truth about his son, before Talon's faction could exploit the secrecy further. The night before the gathering, Alira found herself unable to sleep, anxiety gnawing steadily at her composure. She wandered quietly through the fortress corridors, until she found Draven standing alone upon a balcony, overlooking the moonlit forest below. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly, joining him at the railing. Draven glanced toward her, his expression heavy with unspoken worry. "Tomorrow changes everything," he admitted quietly. "Once the truth is revealed, there's no going back to the careful secrecy we've maintained until now." Alira reached out gently, taking his hand within her own. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you won't face it alone. I promise to protect Kale alongside you, and that promise hasn't changed." Draven turned to face her fully, his amber eyes searching hers with quiet intensity. "Alira, these past months with you and Kale have given me something I feared I'd lost forever. Hope, warmth, a reason beyond duty to continue fighting for this territory's future." Alira's breath caught at the vulnerability within his words, her own feelings mirroring the quiet intensity building steadily between them. "Draven, Before she could finish, a sudden commotion erupted from within the fortress, shouts echoing urgently through the corridors below. Draven's expression hardened instantly, protective instincts overriding the tender moment between them. "Stay here," he commanded firmly, already moving swiftly toward the source of the disturbance. Alira followed cautiously behind him, her heart pounding with sudden fear. They arrived to find chaos within the fortress courtyard, warriors clashing fiercely as Talon's faction made their move ahead of schedule, seizing the opportunity of unrest to attempt an open challenge against Draven's authority. "Talon has moved against us directly," Garrick shouted urgently, rushing toward Draven amid the chaos. He claims the throne rightfully belongs to those willing to lead openly, without secrets or hidden heirs. Draven's expression turned fierce with protective fury, his gaze immediately searching for Kale's safety. "Where is my son?" "Secured within the inner chambers," Garrick confirmed quickly. "But Talon's forces grow bolder by the moment. We must act swiftly to end this, before it spirals further." Draven turned toward Alira, his expression urgent yet steady. "Stay hidden until this passes. I need to end this now, before more lives are risked unnecessarily." Alira nodded, though fear gripped her chest, as Draven moved swiftly into the fray, his commanding presence immediately drawing the attention of Talon's rebellious warriors. The confrontation had finally arrived, forcing Draven to defend not only his throne, but the safety of everyone he had come to protect and love, within the quiet sanctuary he had built amid the chaos of his court. The fortress courtyard had become a scene of fierce confrontation, warriors loyal to Draven standing firm against those who had aligned themselves with Talon's ambitions. Draven moved through the chaos with commanding authority, his presence alone rallying his loyal warriors despite the confusion surrounding the sudden uprising. Talon stood at the center of his rebellious faction, his expression cold and determined as he faced Draven directly. "This territory deserves a leader unburdened by secrets," Talon declared loudly, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "You've hidden your own heir away, like something shameful, deceiving this entire pack for months. I protected my son from those who sought to end his life before it truly began," Draven replied fiercely, his voice steady, despite the tension surrounding him. "The same enemies who took his mother from me. Tell me, Talon, how deeply do your own ambitions align with those who orchestrated her death?" Talon's expression flickered briefly, a flash of something dangerously close to guilt crossing his features, before he composed himself once more. "I had nothing to do with Celine's death," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "But perhaps her death revealed exactly how unfit you've become to lead this territory, distracted by grief and secrecy rather than strength." Draven's fury sharpened at Talon's words, understanding clearly now that whatever true loyalty this faction claimed was nothing more than opportunistic ambition, disguised as concern for the pack's stability. "You seek power for yourself, nothing more," Draven said coldly. "And you would risk innocent lives, including that of a child, to claim it." The warriors surrounding them shifted uneasily, some clearly reconsidering their allegiance as Draven's words settled heavily among them. Sensing the shift, Talon grew desperate, signaling his remaining loyal warriors to advance more aggressively. Alira, watching anxiously from the fortress entrance, felt her heart race as the confrontation intensified. She glanced back toward the inner chambers, where Kale remained hidden, torn between the instinct to stay close to him and the desire to support Draven amid the growing danger. Suddenly, one of Talon's warriors broke from the main confrontation, moving swiftly toward the inner chambers where Kale was hidden, clearly intent on using the child as leverage against Draven. Alira's breath caught in fear as she realized the danger unfolding, quickly moving to intercept the threat herself. "Stop," she shouted firmly, positioning herself protectively at the chamber entrance as the warrior approached. The wolf hesitated only briefly, clearly surprised by her fierce determination, despite lacking any physical advantage against him. "Step aside, healer," he growled warningly. "This matter does not concern you." "He is a child," Alira replied firmly, refusing to move from her position. "Whatever quarrel you have with Draven, it does not justify harming an innocent pup." The warrior's hesitation deepened, clearly conflicted by her unwavering resolve, though tension remained high as he considered his next move. Before he could act further, Draven arrived swiftly, having noticed Alira's absence amid the confrontation, and immediately understanding the danger she now faced. "Touch her, and you'll answer directly to me," Draven warned fiercely, positioning himself protectively between Alira and the threatening warrior. Faced with Draven's commanding fury, the warrior finally retreated, understanding clearly that Talon's rebellion had already lost its momentum amid Draven's unwavering resolve and the clear loyalty of most of the fortress's warriors. With the immediate threat subsided, Draven turned back toward the courtyard, where Talon now stood isolated, most of his supporters having abandoned their rebellious stance upon witnessing the clear moral failure of endangering an innocent child. "This ends now, Talon," Draven declared firmly, his voice carrying clearly across the now quieted courtyard. "Your ambition has cost you the loyalty of those you sought to lead, Leave this territory peacefully, or face the consequences of your actions directly. Talon's expression hardened with bitter resignation, understanding clearly that his rebellion had failed entirely. Without further argument, he turned and departed swiftly, disappearing into the surrounding forest alone, his ambitions crushed beneath the weight of his own poor judgment. As the chaos finally settled, Draven turned back toward Alira, his expression softening with relief and gratitude. "You risked your life for him," he said quietly, reaching out gently, to ensure she remained unharmed. "I told you I would protect him, no matter what," Alira replied softly, her earlier fear giving way to quiet relief, now that the danger had passed. Draven pulled her gently into a grateful embrace, the tension of the confrontation finally releasing between them. "Thank you," he murmured softly against her hair, "for everything you've given both Kale and myself." As they stood together amid the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, Kale emerged cautiously from the inner chambers, his small form rushing eagerly toward them both. Draven knelt immediately, gathering his son protectively into his arms, relief and love evident in every gentle movement. Alira watched the tender reunion with quiet happiness, understanding clearly now that whatever challenges remained ahead, this small, unconventional family had finally found the safety and strength necessary to face them together. In the weeks following Talon's failed rebellion, peace gradually settled over Ashwood territory once more. Draven addressed the entire court openly, finally revealing the full truth about his son's identity, and the reasons behind the secrecy he had maintained since Celine's death. The gathered wolves listened intently, many expressing quiet relief that their king's heir remained alive and safe, while others simply nodded in solemn understanding of the difficult choices Draven had faced. Garrick stood proudly beside his king throughout the announcement, grateful that the truth had finally come to light on Draven's own terms, rather than through Talon's manipulative intentions. The remaining warriors who had briefly aligned with Talon's faction expressed genuine remorse, pledging renewed loyalty to Draven and his young heir. With the immediate danger resolved, Draven turned his attention toward rebuilding the life he had once imagined sharing with Celine, though now reshaped by the unexpected presence of Alira within his and Kale's lives. Their bond, forged through months of shared secrecy and growing affection, deepened steadily into something neither had anticipated, but both had come to cherish deeply. One quiet evening, as autumn gave way to the gentle chill of early winter, Draven found Alira sitting beside the fortress's grand fireplace, watching Kale play contentedly among several other pups who had since joined the fortress nursery, under her continued care. He approached quietly, settling beside her with a warmth that had grown increasingly natural between them. "You've built something remarkable here," he said softly, watching the playful scene before them. "Not just for Kale, but for every pup who has found safety within these walls because of you." Alira smiled softly, leaning gently against his shoulder. "We built it together," she replied warmly. "None of this would have been possible without your protection and trust." Draven turned to face her fully, his expression filled with quiet tenderness. "Alira, these past months have given me something I feared I had lost forever. Not just safety for my son, but genuine happiness and partnership I never expected to find again." Alira's heart swelled at his heartfelt words, her own feelings mirroring the depth of emotion reflected in his amber eyes. "I feel the same," she admitted softly. "I never imagined finding this kind of happiness, especially not within a life so different from anything I once knew." Draven reached gently for her hand, his voice steady with quiet conviction. "Then stay with us, Alira, not simply as Kale's caretaker, but as my mate, as the queen this territory truly needs alongside me." Alira's breath caught at his sincere proposal, tears of joy gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. "Yes," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with happiness. "Yes, Draven, I would be honored to stand beside you and Kale, now and always." Their quiet declaration was met with soft, joyful yips from Kale, who seemed to sense the significance of the moment, despite his young age, rushing eagerly toward them both. Draven laughed warmly, gathering his son into his arms alongside Alira, the small family finally united in safety, love, and hope for the future ahead. News of their union spread quickly throughout the territory, met with widespread celebration among the pack, grateful for the peace and stability finally restored to their community. Elira's cottage, once a quiet refuge for forgotten pups, became formally recognized as the territory's official nursery, expanded generously under Draven's continued support, ensuring countless future orphans would always find warmth, safety, and unconditional care. As winter fully settled over Ashwood Hollow, the fortress halls that once echoed with grief and quiet suspicion now filled instead with laughter, warmth, and the joyful sounds of pups playing freely without fear. Draven ruled with renewed strength and confidence, his heart healed by the family he had rebuilt from tragedy, while Alira continued her cherished work, now supported fully by the very territory she had once served quietly from its edges. Kale grew steadily under both their watchful care, destined one day to inherit not just a title, but a legacy built upon compassion, courage, and unconditional love. And though the shadows of the past never fully disappeared, the small, unconventional family that had formed from an unlikely beginning stood together, resilient and hopeful, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, always united, always protected, and always deeply, unconditionally loved.